It is started. People are just coming in from the wait room now.
Yeah. All right. Well, good morning, everyone from Boston, and thank you for your patience. We were having, as you can imagine, some technical challenges, and I'm just delighted that we've been able to address those and that Charlene Sunkel has been able to join us for the second of our Frontiers in Mental Health lecture series. Just by way of introduction, my name is Vikram Patel. I am the Performer Professor in the Department of Global Health and Social Medicine at Harvard Medical School, and I co-lead the Global Mental Health at Harvard initiative, which is a cross-university initiative that seeks to examine questions about mental health and mental health care, drawing from very diverse disciplines from across the university. The Frontiers in Mental Health series is a new lecture series that we launched earlier this year. The first lecture was delivered by Sir Graham Thornycroft a few weeks ago, and this is the second in that series. We plan to have 4 flagship lectures every year, and our next lecture will be in October, so please keep a lookout for the announcement of that lecture. But today, our lecture is going to be delivered by Charlene Sunkel, a dear friend and a colleague who I have known for more than a decade. Charlene is the CEO of Aves Mental Health, which she founded and launched in 2018. With her lived experience of mental health problems, Charlene is a global advocate for the rights of people living with mental health conditions. Her contributions extend to scientific partnerships, authoring numerous papers from a lived experience perspective. For example, the Lancet Commission on Global Mental Health and Sustainable Development and the Lancet Commission on Ending Stigma and Discrimination in Mental Health and the Lancet Commission on the Future of Psychiatry. She's the editor-in-chief of the newish journal PLOS Mental Health. She lends her expertise to various international boards and committees. For example, she has contributed her insights as a member of the South African Presidential Working Group on Disability. I forgot to mention that Charlene is herself South African and is joining us today from South Africa. She's also served on the Ministerial Advisory Committee on Mental Health of that country. She has previously served as the principal coordinator for the Movement of Global Mental Health, which acts as a secretariat, for which Aves Mental Health serves as the secretariat. She's been recognized through multiple awards, including the Inseta Women's Award, the Tributes Award for Human Rights, the Jim Burley Scholarship, the Swiss Foundation World Health Organization Outstanding Achievement Award in Mental Health, the Pardes Humanitarian Prize in Mental Health, and a World Psychiatric Association Presidential Commendation. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce Charlene, who I have known personally for, like I said, for more than a decade, Charlene. We go back a long way, and I have watched her incredible leadership of the lived experience movement and how she has forged unique partnerships between the lived experience movement and other sectors which are concerned with mental health. Charlene, we're delighted you could join us today. Just for our audience, I want to just remind you that the format is that Charlene will deliver a lecture. I will then moderate a Q&A. And so please insert any questions you might have for Charlene in the Q&A box that you can see at the bottom of your Zoom window. And I will make sure that we can try and get to as many of those questions as possible in the time that we have available. Charlene, welcome again, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Vikram, and very nice to be with all of you and having this opportunity to talk to you about people with lived experience and kind of on the topic of disrupting traditional research methodologies. So moving from subjects of research to really co-production. Okay, so I'm going to start by just reflecting a bit back where we've been over time and how things evolved, and some key elements regarding integration of people with lived experience. And then I will move into talking a bit about Aves mental health and kind of we'll see how it reflects back to how things evolved over time. Yeah, we do see, I would actually say in the last 5 years, especially we've seen a significant paradigm shift. I remember when I started like 8 years ago, there was still very much a context where people with lived experience narratives, our stories were told about us and not by us. We've often also been more passive recipients of care, like silent objects on a clinical conveyor belt. We were often excluded from our own treatment and recovery plans, and on a broader level, also excluded from providing our insights into policies, research, and systems, and those that govern our lives. So, from that history of really being silent throughout all those aspects of mental health, we do see a really growing and powerful recognition now of lived experience experts as essential leaders and co-creators within the mental health landscape. So why is it important to include people with lived experience? Apart from being a human right, our expertise deriving from our experiences of navigating systems and also experiencing symptoms really gives us that unique perspective on resilience, adaptation, and solutions that really can address and support the needs at grassroots level. That can happen through us helping to shape research, policies, and programs that are inclusive and also effective and also cost effective. So that also inadvertently establishes equity and justice, and then we are ensuring that vulnerable groups are not further marginalized. There are some tangible outcomes when we include people with lived experience. Of course, we are no longer being seen as just patients, but key partners within the mental health landscape. We are also kind of play an important role in service delivery, as we see a lot of, especially more in high-income countries, but starting to become a thing in low and middle-income countries, is peer support specialists, where we are able to provide our lived experiences to help guide our peers on their recovery journeys. Another element which is also fundamental is our involvement in education and academic spaces, where we play roles of educators and training facilities in mental health. And by that, we really bring that deeper understanding of what it is to live with a mental health condition. And that is something that the traditional clinical training cannot provide. We also play a critical role as architects in policy, from drafting legislation, advising ministries, and also making sure that laws are protecting the rights and, very importantly, the dignity of people with mental health conditions. Recently, I would even say last 3 years, especially us as an organization, I'll explain a bit later how we work, seen really an acceleration of people with lived experience being included in research as research collaborators. So that really we can see that kind of the transforming the landscape. We have now the opportunity to really ask questions that matter to us, and that leads to relevant and effective interventions. So making sure that science is really embedded within the reality of what people with lived experience experience, what they need, what they can benefit from. There are several international frameworks that really places a huge emphasis on the importance of including lived experience across sectors. There's just a few important ones that we always kind of use as guides. Is the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which is more your human rights framework. And then the most recent World Mental Health Report from WHO, as well as their framework for meaningful engagement of people with living with NCDs, mental health and neurological conditions. And of course, the Sustainable Development Goals also make reference to inclusion of the voices of people with lived experience, especially in terms of Article 3 on good health and well-being. At Aves Mental Health, we, especially in the beginning when we started seeing this momentum growing with lived experience being included, I think probably the one thing that we often heard is people were quite enthusiastic to include us, but they often didn't know exactly how. So we developed several resources, which you'll also find on our website. And in particular, we drafted consult guidelines just to kind of help guide stakeholders how to best work with us in a meaningful and authentic way. So, yeah, some key aspects of that is, first of all, to create an engaging and a safe and supportive space to enable quality contributions. That is very important to establish that because ultimately you want people with lived experience to be in a position where they're able to contribute high quality. And then also obtain diverse representation of people with lived experience to enhance equality and inclusion. To use an example, sometimes not to just, I know sometimes boards and committees have like one person with lived experience and then other specialities. But sometimes, let's say for me, if there's a project or research project and it's about men's mental health, I'm probably not the right person to be there. And also in terms of demographics, I can't speak on behalf of high income countries. I live in a low middle income country. And also the age groups as well. Young people's voices also need to be heard. So it's always important to kind of provide that wide, diverse perspectives. And then power imbalances, paternalistic approaches. I know these are often with good intentions, but they often become more disempowering than empowering. Tokenism, I suppose that sometimes still happen, where whatever we kind of really provide or contribute sometimes do not always reflect. It's more of a tick box exercise. And then also no discrimination and stigmatization. It's always important to sustain mutual respected partnerships. We always place an emphasis on that when we work with stakeholders. Also, principles of effective engagement and consultation. I'll go through some of those in a moment. And then to really make use of the expertise of people with lived experience by meaningfully and authentically including them. And then I kind of spoke a bit about tokenism. Yeah, is to transform policy and practice that is accurately reflected of lived experience voices. So again, whatever people contribute, whether it's policy research, their recommendations and contributions need to be reflected. And for example, sometimes if it's not realistic to incorporate solutions or suggestions by individuals, then there should also be feedback as to why. So that also brings come back to kind of being transparent. So yeah, some important elements of principles of effective engagement and consultation. First of all, always to include people from the get-go and not as an afterthought. It becomes very difficult to contribute meaningfully and authentically if someone's dumped in the middle of a process because you lose so much what has happened before. And sometimes that causes other elements as well. You start feeling like you're an imposter or you're incapable of contributing just because you've kind of been left out from the beginning of it. Also to ensure meaningful and authentic inclusion through empowerment, valued contributions, like I said, transparency and accountability, and also to create suitable conditions for engagement and consultations. Now, here's a few points that you know that could be relevant. Is first of all to always be clear about the process and the expectations, and also the role and the responsibilities of the persons with lived experience. For example, what's helpful, we always create terms of reference that outlines all of these aspects. And also to some more kind of reasonable accommodations to also consider is pre-consultation orientation sessions. just imagine if we are asked to provide input into a research on something that's quite clinical. It is always important because remember, not all of us are academics or clinical backgrounds. So that orientation session with participants really help to get everybody on the same page, understand their roles, have the opportunity to ask questions. And then also reasonable deadlines and timeframes is also very important, especially if you, like I said, if it's like something that we're not uh, academic background in, like laws or whatever, or clinical aspects. We sometimes we kind of need a little bit more time to read through things. Provide preparation documents also at least a month. We usually say at least a month in advance where possible, and always to provide feedback afterwards. It's always good and empowering for us to know how our contributions were incorporated and, for example, why it wasn't, what the rationale was in instances where it was not. But as we kind of see, and it's always great to see the significant progress we are making, in including lived experience. Of course, there's always barriers. Here's some examples on and how it impact on inclusion. I mean, stigma and discrimination. People are still afraid to disclose their mental health condition. There's bias assumptions. Sometimes people also internalize stigma, and they may feel like what we call like imposter syndrome, and that really silence people's voices, and it kind of don't encourage them to really be involved in research or whatever policies. Structural barriers, there's maybe like lack of mentorship, funding. Sometimes institutional policies are not kind of update to the current evolvement of lived experience inclusion. So that creates barriers for limiting career pathways, and also to fail to recognize both the experiential but also the monetary value of lived experience expertise. Tokenism power is also an issue. For example, symbolic consultations, or where there's hierarchical decision making and people with lived experience involved don't have that joint decision making powers. And that, of course, impacts on research, the relevance at grassroots level. The practical challenges, and that's more where kind of accessibility and reasonable accommodations need to come in. For example, accessibility issues. In terms of that, it can be internet, can be one of those medication side effects where a person struggles to wake up. So where a meeting is maybe very early in the morning and that person cannot kind of really contribute meaningfully. Anxiety, especially in the beginning when you start getting involved, concentration difficulties, and there's ways around that in terms of reasonable accommodation to overcome that. But if there's no kind of mitigation of that, then that reduces the ability to meaningfully engage. And then authenticity, the narrow definitions of lived experience, and also to present one view. Like I said, let's say, for example, if I'm always invited, so I'm basically representing one view. Sometimes, of course, being in this space through the organization, I can kind of gather that, but that's also then excluding diverse perspectives. Now, just to move over to talk a bit about aves mental health. Yeah, formerly we were Global Mental Health Peer Network, and we really changed our name also to kind of stay ahead of the evolving kind of momentum of people with lived experience, really being included in ways that it hasn't been before. We also kind of changed and got more focused on what we are doing. So essentially, there are two pillars in the organization. The first pillar is the mentorship and empowerment component, and that is where we focus now more on 18 to 26-year-olds, Every year we recruit a cohort and they go through a program of peer-to-peer mentorship. And that's also a platform where they have opportunities to exchange knowledge and build skills. So the whole idea of that is to build leadership of people with lived experience and enable them to advocate both at the local and a global level. Then we have Pillar 2. That is a unit that we established, I think, about 2020, 2021. So it's an experts by experience consultancy services. And recently we are also kind of busy building on educational programs. That is an income generation component, but I'll speak a bit more about that in a moment. So Aves mental health really works towards building lived experience leadership to shape the future. Like I said, we focus on empowerment, mentorship, and leadership development, and we enhance through our work lived experience inclusion in a meaningful and authentic way across sectors in mental health. And we also bridging that lived experience expertise in science through constructive partnership building. So we always come from the stance that we alone cannot shape the future, but that the only solution can be that when we all work together. So on the pillar 1 of the empowerment and mentorship component, like I mentioned, we recruit a cohort of individuals every year, young people. So this is a process. So we have a very open and transparent process of recruitment. We have a call for applications that goes open. I'm not going to talk too much about all of this. And then from our members who've already completed the process, they also involved in the recruitment of new applicants. There's a recruitment and orientation committee, and then we kind of just verify the shortlisted if they comply with all the criteria, and then we conduct interviews, and then they are notified and onboarded, and then there's a 1 month probation. The idea of the 1 month probation is to allow them to really decide for themselves, is this really what they're looking for? Are they a good fit? And then they can continue. To give you an overview of our current profile as per our statistics of this year, just 100% people with lived experience. The organization appoints only people with lived experience through all of its structures, including the board of management, right down to volunteers and other structures. Our young people, our youth have increased, but I'm assuming as time goes by, that youth component will grow more because we only started incorporating that in the past 3 years. Women, we always had a strong representation of women, which is quite interesting. And then 27% LGBTQA+, and also a strong element of low and middle income countries at 66%. We have 99 alumni members. That are those members who completed their first 2-year term, and also they also then have an opportunity to become either mentors or advisors. This is just a little graph here to show you on average how many people we appoint per year over the time since we started. So it's about 27. Then to come to our experts by experience consultancy services, we work, this unit is our income generation unit. It basically sustains the organization, covers 80% of all our costs per year, and it operates and functions like a professional service. And as you remember, so that is why the empowerment component is so very important, because those advocates are then involved in our experts by experience services, which are paid services. So we have clients, we work a lot with WHO, many universities and academic institutions. We've worked a lot with funders and donor organizations, where, for example, we would help them with their strategies of funding strategies. We work with governments, helping with laws and policies. So really a wide range of stakeholders. So we've been quite lucky in the sense it took some hard work to really build this unit and gain credibility. Credibility was of utmost importance because, like I said, where we weren't always included. So it was a new thing for everybody. But nowadays, we get an influx of clients approaching us. So they would do that via website or by email. And then we kind of negotiate and see what they need. Sometimes they need, I must maybe say, I would say, yes, roughly 80% of our clients are research related. And by that, we often involved right from the proposal side, and that is ideal. Proposal side, budget side, right to the end of the project. Most are multi-year projects. So then we kind of onboard that client. There's an agreement that's finalized. And then we recruit our consultants, which is our advocates, like I said, who went through the empowerment component. And they then are consultants to these projects. We recruit them based on the research projects criteria. Sometimes, like they were looking for certain people from within a certain age bracket or certain country or region with a specific expertise, let's say schizophrenia, for example. Then we would look among our members who fit that criteria. So we then commence the work, and then once we receive payment for the contract, work concluded, and then they submit invoices and we pay them. So we also improve their socioeconomic stability of our members. Something quite exciting that we started on when we did started the Experts by Experience services. It was quite difficult in terms of what do we ask stakeholders as a reasonable remuneration fee for our consultancy services. And there was literally nothing that we could find that we can base it on. Eventually, we initiated a project to develop a remuneration framework with health economists. We did some research. It was quite difficult to try and compare our roles, lived experience roles, with technical roles because of the competitiveness out there. There's not a lot of disclosure of salary scales and all of that. So what we did is we based it on what was currently paid across the world for lived experience inclusion. So our remuneration framework, we then based on that. The whole idea of this was also like from a human rights angle, where the UN, the Declaration of Human Rights specifically states that everyone without any discrimination has the right to equal pay for equal work. Yeah, back then it was more gender focused, but it evolved over time, and modernized interpretation was equal pay for work of equal value. So we base this on that because the expertise that we bring to stakeholders and research projects are equally of value than other researchers or partners in that project. There is a QR code here, which you can scan to kind of download our remuneration framework. There's also included an inclusion assessment tool for lived experience inclusion. I'll get to that in a bit, but I must just say, if you look here, what we've also included in that is like any job. I mean, you have a level of expertise and you are compensated according to that. So as part of this, we developed a self-assessment tool where people with lived experience can try and assess at what level of expertise they are. And then the remuneration framework, there's a payment scales according to the level of expertise, 1 to 4. But these are just some of the dimensions that we cover, like years of experience, scope of involvement, level of engagement, also the depth of knowledge and understanding, training and skills development, leadership and influence, public contributions, and recognition, accolades, and awards. So then someone would kind of score themselves, and then it would tell them what level they're at. Now, another thing that's also quite exciting that we did shortly after the remuneration framework was to develop self-assessment tools for stakeholders to kind of assess how effectively and meaningfully they include people with lived experience. There are self-assessment tools, one that stakeholders complete, and then one with similar questions that the people with lived experience who are involved in that project or organization also complete. Now, there's different areas for inclusion that we look at, and that's like from the recruitment phase, how transparent and accessible it was. For example, did you kind of disseminate the recruitment, call for applications on social media? What about people who don't have social media? So that kind of accessibility issues. And then also, how was the job description, expectations, and the selection criteria clearly communicated? Was there ensured diverse representation among applicants? And then the other components around orientation and empowerment, much of what I spoke about, like reasonable accommodations, for example, also equal opportunity to demonstrate skills and experiences. So I'm not going to go too much in all of that. Safe and supportive environment, and also feedback mechanisms, and then also communication. Clear and respectful communication was maintained, meeting the materials accessible. Sometimes someone would say they cannot read effectively. It confuses them to read an Excel spreadsheet, for example, rather to have a more accessible format for that person, let's say Word or something else. Regular updates given along the progress of the project, and also open dialogue and feedback, and always to encourage for people to voice any concerns they have, and also having channels that one can address those issues. Support and resources provided, that can be financial, remuneration, of course, equipment, if there's something very specific where the person will need a laptop or whatever, or materials. Reimbursement, that's often what we found in our remuneration framework is that there was very little consideration for other expenses incurred by someone who you engage with. For example, if it's in person, there's travel costs, sometimes visa, all of that. And then someone like online engagement, that is data and airtime. Some countries are quite expensive in terms of data. Then mentorship opportunities and also support. What we do when we work in our consultancy services is, because people may often have to share parts of their own story that may be triggering, we always have peer support available. So that kind of refers to some support in terms of that. Risk management issues there, confidentiality, and of course evaluation to assess and address unintended negative outcomes of participants. So essentially, I think at this point, we need to move away from how do we include lived experience, but rather ask the question, how do we redesign systems? So lived experience leadership is central. I just want to share something else that you could potentially also download. Recently, our Asia-Oceania region drafted a position statement specifically on integrating lived experience as a core methodology for mental health research. So yes, just calls to action, but it may be quite useful for you to download. There's quite a lot of valuable information in there to bridge the gap between technical expertise and lived reality, to embed lived experience as a core methodology, is an act of institutional responsibility, and also to share power across the research life cycle. Another exciting aspect is we often find, especially among our advocates, that many have great interest in getting involved in research, but they don't have research or academic background. Despite that, is because it's always we get involved in research not because of our academic and research background. We get involved because of our lived experiences. So to kind of help and encourage people with lived experience to get involved in research, there is not only researchers or peer researchers, but also people who are not coming from that background to contribute their perspectives. So the Research Ready project is exactly addressing that. So it's an initiative which is commissioned by Wellcome Trust Lived Experience Innovation Fund, and it's led by aves Mental Health in partnership with Empower Mental Health for All Lab at Harvard University. So we work with Vikram and his team. Just completed the research component. So we next stage is actually now busy developing the course content. So it's an online course. The approach is a collaborative, demographically diverse approach to co-design an accessible and inclusive online training course. Idea is to have this course available for anyone, across high and low income countries. And the target audiences is first people with lived experience, as I said, who are non-academics and don't have academic background or research. And then the other category is peer researchers. Those are people with lived experience who are already in research. And then researchers who do not have lived experience. So the whole idea is to equip all three of those categories to be key partners in leading and co-leading research initiatives, and also to create a deep understanding of those complexities and nuances in traditional research methodologies. So in the research component that's been done, so it was to get an understanding of the landscape, understanding what roles people with lived experience play, what they can and should be playing when they're involved in research across all the phases, and then what competencies are required to fulfill those roles in a meaningful and authentic way, and also to look at what barriers are there from preventing involvement in research. And then also to identify practices, of course, that can be considered as best practices for including people with lived experience. Yes, I did well on time. So yeah, is some of resources that we developed, which you can also download. The reasonable accommodations guidelines look specifically at supporting people with lived experience in both in-person and online events or engagement platforms. And then the consult guidelines, which is a little bit more explained from the slide I explained about it. And that's it. Okay, I did quite good. I suppose then there's a bit more time for Q&A, and I thank you very much for listening to me.
Well, thank you so much, Charlene, for that fantastic lecture. I hope you can see me. I've just turned my video on. And I wanted to start off this Q&A. You're right, you've done brilliantly on time, and we have at least about 40 minutes for questions. So I want to take this opportunity to actually ask you a few questions that have been really at the top of my mind as I watched the way your own role in this incredible movement that you have been leading has evolved over the years. And I wanted to start by hearing a little bit more about your personal story. When we first met, I think it was back in 2007 or 2008. I remember very well that you were working for a South African, I think the Mental Health Federation in South Africa, and I think you used to write plays. You were a script writer. So tell us a little bit about those early days of your career as you sort of were taking baby steps, into where you are now.
Yeah, that was quite interesting. I must say at the beginning, it felt like I didn't know what I was doing, but I did it. But yeah, so when I was diagnosed with schizophrenia, I was like early days, 1991. So for a long time, for about 9 years, I lost my job. Everything spiraled out of control. And I think because of the human rights abuses within the system and the lack of believing in me that I'm, a human being who can achieve, I was often told that I cannot achieve. I'll never be able to live alone, all those things. And that really knocked me down. And I thought, that's not right. So that's how I kind of got into the mental health space. So I pitched a few ideas to mental health organizations, first of all, to start a little magazine to kind of display all the artistic talents of people with lived experience, kind of to address, because we're always seen as being useless and not capable of anything. And I thought that was one step. And then someone saw that when I launched that little journal and asked me to write my story as a theater play. I've never seen a theater play at that point. Didn't even know how to write one, but eventually I did it. And it was quite good. That theater play went on to actually Department of Health. Our Department of Health contracted it out as an awareness tool, universities, medical students, for medical students. So it did really well. And then I went on to write another one on someone else's life about bipolar, bringing that whole traditional leader aspect where people with, like in South Africa, often first go to traditional healers. So that one. And then I brought in one on depression. Eventually also wrote a feature, what do you call it, like a little movie on the first two plays, on my life and the one on bipolar, which is still on YouTube. It's called Two Beds, Madness Revealed. So then I did that. And I think that's where I met, were introduced to you, Vikram. And I must say, the day when you said I must come and lecture in India at that leadership course, I thought this guy must be crazy. How can I, as a service user, go and lecture psychiatrists and lawyers and just because you believed in me, that was like a turning point for me. And that is how I kind of really got into building service user movements in South Africa. And it just went from more provincial one. I also still built it on the same model as of aves mental health by empowering people with lived experience. For me, it was always empowerment first before you can, really allow people to meaningfully and authentically be included across everything. So that's kind of in a nutshell.
Well, thank you, Charlene. I mean, that origin story is so very important. I think that links to my next question. Back then, I think you will remember, as will many of those who have been involved with working across these different sectors of formal. Let me be crude about this. The mental health professional sector on the one hand, and the lived experience on the other. Of course, there are a lot of blurred lines between these, but just for the sake of my question. Back in the early 2000s, I remember very well that the lived experience movement, particularly in the global south, was deeply influenced by the experiences of the lived experience movement in the United States and many other wealthy countries. And that experience was one that was actually often colored by very negative, experiences, particularly of psychiatric care. And I remember very well that in Africa there was an association called the Survivors of Psychiatry. I think you might remember that as well. Um, I wanted to hear your thoughts about how have you been able to navigate from what was, 20 years ago, and a fairly a relationship that was at best suspicious, at worst hostile, that the lived experience groups had towards psychiatry and psychology. How have you been able to navigate to where we are today, which is a dramatic realignment and a much more equitable and trusting relationship, if I can even say that, between these sectors?
Yes, I always believe because um, uh, personally, if you come aggressive, or kind of narrow-minded to try and resolve something, you're not going to get anywhere. So I have always, and I always wanted to build service user movements that is uh, kind of creates progress and, builds things in partnership with all stakeholders. Um, but I think creating that credibility it was actually much less difficult than I initially thought it would be. But I always wanted to build partnership. We negotiate, having that respect because respect uh, brings dignity, and that really brings you a lot further than really, just on attack mode, if I can put it that way. I know with our advocates also, we make it we have policies in place that, where we speak about that. And when we do our empowerment sessions, we have had like recently a session on professionalism and how to build your leadership with a strong emphasis on building partnerships. I think for me, often all the problems in the world, if you really think about it, is caused by a lack of effective communication. If we communicate properly and effectively, then we can create partnership, and only then can we really affect change. So that's always a thing for me, and a huge emphasis in all the work we do.
Thanks, Charlene. But that must have been a little challenging, given the fact that the lived experience movement, which, as I said, for our younger listeners, was called Users and Survivors, and the word survivor itself tells you something about the positionality of that movement back in the early 2000s. How did you navigate the movement's own suspiciousness about this kind of partnership? And I want to hear from you whether you yourself felt targeted or accused of, for example, becoming a collaborator, which back in the day was not an unknown kind of way of describing a person with a lived experience working closely with psychiatry.
Yes, I definitely had that. But for me, it's just, I think we just need to stand firm in what we believe. For me, that was that element, because I also, for me, I mean, you can still see, let's say in psychiatry, it's not all bad. I mean, many of us, like service users, benefit from it. I spoke a lot with people with lived experience about their views around psychiatry and so. And I must say, the majority, especially in South Africa at that time, was for psychiatry. The reasons that some may have opposed was more related to stigma and discrimination, but never as how can I say, a dangerous element to it. Um, for us, we recognize, like I would rather recognize this from a human rights element of how some of the things are conducted. Let's say, for example, how involuntary treatment is conducted. Again, communication is a big issue. And also how involvement of someone in their care, instead of just telling them you need to take this medication and that medication without explanation, without including them, is very disempowering. So those are the elements that I wanted to change. And also from a human rights perspective, I value. We really value people for their choices. We don't kind of dismiss those who do not want to take treatment, who make by choice, don't want to take treatment. That is their choice. So a lot of it is about the choice of the person. But like I said, I mean, We've always had people who kind of value the psychiatry field. But of course, you do get here and there. But that is also their right. I think it's just also respecting people's right and respecting people's views.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, the diversity of people's views is it's always a bad idea to essentialize or stereotype a whole diverse group of people and say these are your views. In the same way, I think it's also correct not to generalize psychiatry on the basis of negative experiences that clearly occur and have occurred within psychiatric care. I want to turn to a point that you just raised. I think it's one of those delicate points that I know you and I have discussed, and I can see Michael Stein in our in amongst our audience, who has been at the forefront of thinking about this very delicate issue around the CRPD and its position on the question of capacity consent for mental health care. And as you know very well, but for the audience, essentially, one position that the CRPD takes is that people with serious mental health conditions who are described in the CRPD as people with psychosocial disabilities. And I'd like to ask your thoughts also about that terminology. What is your view on that terminology? But the CRPD really says, people, as with any other disability, people with psychosocial disabilities should be recognized as having full rights of citizenship as anyone else, and that particularly refers to the respecting their decisions on whether or not they receive care. So this also includes situations where within mental health services could be seen as being circumstances in which that decision making is seriously impaired by the mental health condition and can potentially lead to risk to harm to that individual's own well-being. So two questions there, and then I'm going to turn to the questions that the audience has asked. The first is just your thoughts about the terminology. What is your preferred terminology to refer to people with a lived experience? And secondly, how would you navigate this very, very delicate space between capacity under all circumstances versus the idea that there may be extreme or exceptional circumstances in which that capacity is impaired?
Yes, let me start there. I think there are extreme circumstances in which capacity may be affected, and I can actually speak for myself, my own experiences, and I've also spoken to others. In South Africa, I once did a little survey or engagement with people with lived experience, those specifically who had been involuntarily admitted or considered, they didn't have legal capacity. And all of them actually, yeah, it was a large percentage, not most of them said it's fine. They prefer having involuntary treatment and not when they're unable to make decisions. However, they the issue they had, which I also have, is how it was done. Imagine the police arrive, load you in, ambulance arrive, you're like, there's no communication with you. I must maybe share one story. Recently, I presented at a psychiatric conference in South Africa, and someone from more of a rural area was um, attending a psychiatrist, and I was presenting on alternatives to coercion. And I think that is also one element of, yeah, there are ways to reduce coercive measures. But anyway, so he was telling me what they do with a patient or person. They would throw a blanket over him, tie him up, and load him in the back of a vehicle to take him to hospital. Now, I was horrified by it because can you imagine for any person, irrelevant if they got a mental health condition, if someone comes and throw a blanket over you, tie you up, put you in the back, take you somewhere, you will react in an aggressive way. And often I think that is why there's so much involuntary admissions, which can be totally unnecessary. I think only if the manner in which it's done, where the person is still involved in the decisions, and I mean we got like advanced directives, which is also one element that could assist, where the person still have uh, kind of decision making through a support person. We often refer to support. supported decision making. So that I believe if those things are in place, because we also have to protect someone who may not be able to make decisions. There's also safety and a risk, and I think it needs to come from both sides. Communication needs to be open and safeguards in place. Was it something I left out?
No, so I just want to hear your thoughts about what would be your position on the question of the CRPD, guidance, as it were, about, capacity under all circumstances in any condition. I think I understand what you're saying, but I just wanted to maybe just press you a little bit to say how would you respond to some of the concerns that people have expressed regarding the potential negative consequences of taking that position.
Yeah, I suppose I don't have an answer.
Well,
Like a solution. It's a solution, but I believe there should be not under all circumstances. They are. I've seen it among people who get to a point where they're unable to have legal capacity, and I think temporarily, for the shortest time possible, if there's safety mechanisms in place for that, um, but with a focus on protecting the person and protecting the person's dignity.
Yeah. Let me turn to some of the questions that others have asked. So Michael Stein asked a very important question, and that's related a lot to the work we're doing together, Charlene. You mentioned peer support as a way of enabling mental health. Can you tell us a little bit more about, give us some examples of how it might work in the real world?
Peer support, yes. Yeah, in the real world, let's say in a context like South Africa, where we do have primary healthcare clinics and psychiatry, is dealt with within that primary healthcare clinics. But we often find that the nurses that they like overburdened with people coming to see the psychiatrist or get their medications on a daily basis. Because I spoke with a lot of them, and for example, they would always complain and say they don't have time because this person asking about how to apply for their disability grant, or they need support for that, or navigate other systems. They don't have time. So then they become kind of, short-tempered with the people, and then it's a nasty situation. So my idea, if only one could deploy people, peer support workers at all the clinics, community clinics, who can support that people with lived experience with questions like uh, self-help mechanisms, understanding how they can use their story, navigating systems. Maybe even, I think in the US there's navigators, system navigators. I kind of like that concept because especially new people in the community who experience for the first time mental health conditions do not necessarily know what systems they can navigate for further help as apart from just the community clinic. And that would be essential at all of the clinics. I think in the long run, also having that element of hope, speaking to someone who have gone through similar things than you are, because it can be a very lonely journey. And just by that, I'm quite convinced that the rehospitalizations, all of that costs will reduce in the long run. But of course, at the moment, for example, in low middle income countries, there's not really much training for peer support specialists because trying to convince governments right now just to put someone with a lived experience into a position like that, they're not going to fall for it. They're going to need something that the person at least have some credential qualifications to do so. So that is why empower peer support that we work on with you guys is so important.
Thanks, Charlene. Let me turn to a question from Victor. Victor's from Nigeria. He writes that he's leading a project that focuses on improving adolescent mental health in Nigeria through a peer-led mental health ambassadors program. And he asked the question, Given that adolescents often do not openly identify as having lived experience with mental health challenges, how can he ethically and meaningfully engage them as co-creators rather than just as participants in school-based and other youth mental health programs?
Yeah, my first thought would be to focus on the youth element, not so much on, lived experience, because I think I can't really speak for young people. I'm a bit too old, but I think if you focus, I see it a lot with there's a lot of engagement, and it's like youth, because I think once you get the youth together, then you're going to get them more comfortable to come out and speak about their own lived experiences. That is definitely one way I would go towards that. And I support maybe also in community settings in the schools more to do kind of awareness, but in a positive spin in schools. So people, I think you need to get people to, or young people to get comfortable enough to kind of speak out and also know, that it's not a bad thing to do that. I don't know if you have, I mean, if you have ambassadors, that's also a good thing for the lived experience ambassadors themselves to go talk at schools would also make a huge difference.
Thanks, Victor. I hope that answers your question. Please do get back in touch with Charlene. I'm sure she'll be very happy to talk to you about how this could be done in practical terms. She's already referred to, some of the training that Charlene's organization and we are developing, and hopefully we will release very soon now. We're on I think, very close to publishing the whole program. Laura, who you know well from our lab here, has a question. And she, of course, wants to appreciate how refreshing it is to hear your remarks. Her question is, what would you say to researchers who feel strapped for time and face pressure to meet certain metrics from their institution or funders? How would you encourage them that co-creation and authentic collaboration is possible even within such very constrained, fast-paced environments?
Okay, let me try to do that. I think that is one thing that we need to engage funders on is the time limits. We've experienced it so much, and it makes it so difficult because for me it's also about meaningful engagement and meaningful inclusion, because you cannot meaningfully contribute if you time strapped. I think there's a way that we need to form partnerships with funders and just come to, an agreement, and just to talk about what is necessary from a funder's side to really look at. I mean, they obviously want the best outcome of the project that they are funding. And I think the focus should be on that, and less on the very specific time frame. I hope I understood that question correctly.
Yeah, I think so. You're right. I want to turn to a question from Jana Muller, who asks, just to explain a little bit more, how do you get people with a lived experience to become, as it were, to disclose and to become more public about their experience, to become your advocates or ambassadors? How does that process actually work? How do you get, you describe people applying. I just wondered, to what extent do the people applying represent the broader community of people with lived experience?
Yes, we do not. We first of all do not kind of force our advocates to publicly disclose or publicly talk about their stories if they don't want to. Because again, once they're comfortable, some of them may join initially and then much later only feel comfortable sharing. I think it's up to that person at what point. But it's also what we also provide is like giving people, mentor them on how to use their stories in a positive way, especially when it comes to research or other projects or community projects. How to use your story. Sometimes people are always not sure how to do it exactly. Um, Sorry, I lost track of it. The concentration is getting low.
Yeah, I think you know what, we're going to have a couple more questions and then we're going to let you go, Charlene. I wanted to ask one question that's remaining from the from our audience, and I think it's an important one, and I think it is one I'd like to hear your thoughts on, and that is Afshan's question is about a significant but often overlooked barrier is the performative expectation placed on lived experience experts. For example, they're often asked to share their trauma, and I think this relates to your point. We never force people. You never force people to disclose their experience, to share their trauma for impact, and often excluded from the strategic decisions that follow. And his question is, how do we break down the barrier that treats lived experience as a resource to be mined for emotion rather than a strategic intelligence? I think these are beautiful words, Afshan, and very, very eloquently, the question is very beautiful. I'd love to hear Charlene's thoughts on that, and then we will round up with just one final question.
Well, what we kind of observe also, what's quite interesting, I think in the beginning, a couple of years ago, everything has been around our stories and our traumas. It hasn't been really, because you now see a lot. If I look at our advocates in the organization, they all have expertise. I think even the lived experience community are developing their own expertise, not necessarily, but by that time, of course, knowing how to use your story where you feel comfortable with, but you still have that expertise. I mean, many in maternal mental health, youth mental health, AI, all those things, they develop their expertise. And I think when including, we also emphasize when we include people, when there's a project, they're looking for specific criteria of people to share whatever. Um, it is, of course, it should be decision of that person. I must say, not everybody. I think sometimes there's a bit of a misperception. I've seen it a lot in like South Africa. Let's say a policy is developed. They randomly choose people with lived experience because they need people with lived experience to be involved. Not everybody is interested in advocacy. Not everybody is interested in research. Not everybody. It's their choice. I think we also emphasize with our people, if we come to you with an opportunity in research or whatever to do some consultancy work, don't just take it. Take it because you have a vested interest in it and you have kind of some expertise in that field. I think we need to look over the whole lived experience, but more from the consultancy, almost like a professional type expertise.
Yeah. I know you're getting a little fatigued, and I don't want to take much more of your time or exhaust you, but I wanted to ask you one last question, and that is really your vision for the future of Aves. What would you, if you had to, look through the crystal ball, as it were, and imagine what Aves will be doing or will have achieved, let's say 5 years from now, what would that be, Charlene?
Yeah. Yes, of course, to keep keep growing and to I think at the moment what's because of low human resource capacity, we can only appoint so many people to go through our empowerment the mentorship program. I would have loved to see that we have enough resources to take in a lot more. To give you an idea, like this year, we received applications, close to 200 applications. We can only appoint roughly between 20 and 20, 30 max because of this. So that definitely, the more we can empower, especially young people, but also to focus more on beyond that, once we empower them, to really see the integration of lived experience without being an issue, that it's a standardized criteria for anything or standardized thing automatically, like when you open a shop you need to appoint a cashier, you know that whenever you start a project it's automatic. There needs to be a person with lived experience. Shouldn't be a question.
Thank you so much, Charlene, and thank you for being so patient with the many questions that I had and the others in the audience had. It's been an absolute delight to have you with us today. Charlene, you know very well that your voice now carries such enormous weight, not just in the lived experience community, but in fact in the broader global mental health community. I want to thank you for your leadership. I want to thank you for your partnership and for being with us today. For all our audience members, just note, as Katie has posted, the webinar will be on YouTube. Share the link with others who may not have been able to join in person today. And please do also keep a lookout for the other announcements for the Frontier series, which will happen in the fall. Once again, thank you all, and thank you, Charlene.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Keep well.